I think Toronto is a really attractive city in which to build. I was privileged to have been at Uber when we launched our engineering hub here in Toronto. I'm now part of a company called FreshBooks that has their HQ here in Toronto. It's just a great, diverse, vibrant city. Hi, my name is Faye Pang. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at FreshBooks, a cloud-based accounting platform for small businesses based right here in Toronto, and I am an entrepreneur in residence for TBDC. So I had the privilege of being on the team that launched the Uber Eats app actually right here in Toronto in 2015. So it's a little known fact, but Toronto was the very first city that ever had the Uber Eats app in the world. And when we launched, we thought this was going to be a product that was really fit for the urban market, young urbanites, downtown core. And what we eventually realized is actually this is a product that could span across the entire country, suburbs, etc. And it was a very big lesson in how big Canada is geographically, but also how diverse it is from a mindset and a culture perspective. So what works in downtown Toronto is not going to work in rural Alberta, right? Is definitely not going to work in northern Saskatchewan. And so just understanding the nuance of the different communities in which you want to operate and how to adapt your go-to-market strategy, your sales talk track, your product. In Uber Eats' case, the restaurant selection, the pricing model, how we attracted couriers, all of those things need to be tailored to the communities in which we operated because, it's not one country, it's many countries when you think about the differences, and that's before we even get to Quebec and the language in Quebec. So really knowing the communities where you're operating and tailoring your experience is super important. So two of the most common challenges I see with European companies trying to come to Canada, first and foremost, localization, right? Translating those messages for your customers, making sure the language and the lingo resonates and that using the exact right phrasing I think is really important, and that extends to the product as well. And then the second piece would be adapting to the local regulations and compliance requirements, deeply understanding whether it's the tax regime or any other regulations that you need to comply with, and making sure that your business model is interpreted in the right way and that it fits within that and that you're adapting where you need to, whether it's about go-to-market or product requirements. I think there's a couple of common mistakes I've observed startups make when they're entering into a new market. First and foremost is probably hiring ahead of where they are, right? When you're entering into a new market, just as you're entering into a new category, there's so many unknowns. What's the skill set that you're gonna need? What are the approaches and tactics? And so really going against the urge to hire a bunch of people before you know exactly what your strategy is going to be, exactly what that market is going to need. I certainly encourage folks to tread lightly, land that strategy, land that plan before they start to hire. And if you are going to hire, try to hire for athletes, right? Folks that can flex and move with you in your plan and not be too rigid in sort of their skill set or mindset in terms of what's needed. I think there are a lot of cultural nuances from coming from Europe to Canada and doing business here. One specific example I'll call out is a phenomenon we call the Canadian no. And so because Canadians can be so polite at times and not want to hurt your feelings, they may have no interest in your product, no real desire to enter into that agreement, but they'll give you false hope and they will hesitate to say no outright. We call that the Canadian no, and your ability to identify that within a sales cycle, quickly close loss that, and move on is going to be critical to not wasting your time chasing prospects that are in fact just trying to say no. There's so many opportunities, specifically within Canada and within North America more broadly, that startups could fill. Canada is a large geographic piece of land, and so thinking about how we reach some of those more rural communities with the latest technology and innovation, they often get overlooked for the big cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, but there are millions of Canadians that live in those markets that deserve and need services that you're offering, and so thinking about how you might expand beyond that. There's obviously an aging population, so when you think about health tech, we've seen some great success from local companies in this space, but I think there's some great opportunity there to help with the aging population and help Canadians access better, more innovative opportunities and options when it comes to med tech and health tech. I'm personally really passionate about how we approach things like menopause for women, and really helping destigmatize some of these areas and put technology in places to fill in gaps that we see in sort of traditional medicine today. I also think logistics is a big opportunity. I spent some time working at Uber on Uber Freight, which was our trucking product here in Canada. And the reason I was really passionate about that is because 70% of trucking miles driven is still inefficient, right? It's not a full load. There's an opportunity to optimize there, and yet most of our goods still travel at some point in their journey on a truck. And so how do we optimize that process? How do we inject technology into that? How do we make it more seamless and efficient in order to bring down costs and improve experience are things that I'm really excited about. Really challenge your assumptions on things that you might hold to be true for your European customers and how that may or may not be true for Canadian customers. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We still have a lot of folks here in Canada that write checks. And so as an example, that may be a thing of the past where you're from. That is very much the reality here still. And so think about what that might mean for your technology and the messaging that you need to land. When you're thinking about building a really strong North American team where maybe they're a satellite office from a European HQ, I would always think about what are those systems, tools, and processes that you're putting in place to ensure that it runs effectively even when you may not be here. So providing that clarity of vision, ensuring alignment, having really great asynchronous tools, right? Whether that's sort of a Confluence page or a Core Notion page, the right cadence of meetings and check-ins, but ultimately to empower those individuals to do really great work even when you're not here. When you're planning your North American expansion and thinking about your legal and regulatory compliance and obligations, I always recommend consulting a professional. You can do your internet searching and leverage ChatGPT, but there's simply no substitute for getting great help and making sure that you understand, both the regulations, but then also how you might interpret them, right? Because you should never take it at face value, especially when you're thinking about innovation and out-of-the-box ideas that may not be contemplated by current regulations. Again, I was privileged enough to have been at Uber pre-ride-sharing regulations, and we had very, very good help in understanding what were obligations, how might we influence and impact that, and where do we think that was going in order to adjust our business model and how we went to market. So I always suggest you get help, and there's no shortage of great law firms here in Canada that would be happy to support. When you're thinking about applying for local grants and funding, my experience has been that it is much smoother if you incorporate here in Canada. Certainly at the Women's Equity Lab, that's how we operate, is looking for that Canadian-based company and the Canadian-based founders. And so incorporating just opens up more opportunity for you, both from a public funding and grants perspective, but also from a private funding and VC perspective as well. Really important for startup founders to keep an open mind as you're leading an expansion into a new market, particularly if you've had success in your home market. I think it's very easy to say, this is what worked for us then, this is our playbook, we're just going to drop it into a new country and it's up and to the right. And the truth is, it does take localization, it does take adaptation. The customer base may not be the same. The way they view your product is likely very different. Your competitive set is entirely new. And so thinking about that resiliency, the flexibility, and the adaptability, especially in the early days of a new market launch, I think are just really important traits to have. I think there's so many great resources for startups that are entering into the North American market. TBDC is a great example of this, where there are resources for you, there are folks on the ground here that can help you. Do not be afraid to tap into that and to leverage it, right? There's absolutely no shame in that. These are folks that are well-versed in this market that can connect you to the right resources, whether it be funding, advice, consulting, etc. So really encourage people to lean in, educate yourself about what's available to you and your business, and take advantage of that. What's the worst that can happen? You get some great advice.